Alrighty. I'm thrilled to be here again. I was here 4 years ago, in great part due to Beverly Haldeman's assistance. She helped me with the PowerPoint, and then we amended it a little bit, and a lot has changed since then, so we'll be using some of the same slides, but there'll be a lot of new information. And I hope a good portion of that comes from you folks, that we have really a conversation. So please speak right up or raise your hand or however you'd like to join with a back and forth conversation, because I think this will be way more fun if everybody's involved. Big thanks to Jan. I'm so impressed, Jan, that you put this article together from some notes I sent you, and you didn't miss a trick.
Thank you.
Exactly spot on. And then and Jan added this whole piece in the middle. I hope everybody took note of, about interpreting tree rings, which is really dendrochronology is the foundation of what we know about the previous fire cycle, which is what kept our forests safe from catastrophic crown fire. There's been a couple of lectures recently in Taos about studies that have been done just in these mountains that revealed that there had been, depending on the elevation and the aspect, there had been fires as frequently as every 12 years or as long as 40 years that burned through underneath the canopy of the large trees. So these are just some great photos to bring forward the idea of how important water, how intrinsic it is to the health of the forest. I hope folks noticed of course, it was a blustery day, wasn't it? Outside for everyone. Did you notice the snow on the east mountains over here seeming to fall out of what exactly? There wasn't really a snow clouds over the top of it. And I noticed that they were falling, the snow patches that were falling, it sure looked like snow, were falling in the little nests in the mountains. Did you notice that? The ridges were left open and subject to wind and so forth, but the snow seemed to find those little pockets. So that accumulation, and we remember this from school, there was some conversation about the watershed infiltration of water up high running down low, and then we have our wells. I just wanted to ask folks in the room, how many of us have domestic water wells that we depend on for our, and isn't that just the tastiest water and wonderfully clean? In most parts of town it's pretty wonderful, most parts of the valley. That water's been getting banked deep under the ground for millennia due to this process, but unfortunately in the modern era it's been interfered with to some degree, and so that's what we're going to talk about today, is making sure that doing what we can. This is one of those things in this world today which seems so kind of running amok, that this is one of the things we can actually influence, and some big steps have happened locally to facilitate the more infiltration of water. And we actually did that whenever it snows in Taos, like it did Monday, and then the subsequent day, Tuesday. Yesterday was pretty moist too. We get out and say we create some water, because we cut trees that are in between the existing trees, so the snow and rain on the next storm can fall all the way to the ground and soak in. And then it also encourages the grass stand that historically existed beneath the forest. So since it's Native Plant Society, we wanted to focus on some of the very special trees. Of course, ponderosa coexists with gamble oak and lives 7,500 to 9,500 feet roughly here. Typically was really widely spaced. Mostly what's happened here locally, like in Gallina Canyon and El Salto, for example, llama, it's been invaded underneath with juniper and pinon for reasons we're going to get to. But that's a crucial tree to having a stable ecosystem, and actually shelters the moisture when it comes in storms. That's an interesting stand on the right. I think I got that off the internet. Let's take in some ponderosa pine, vanilla smelling tree. Here's one of the invading trees in under ponderosa pine. Of course it has its own zone of habitat. I think this is the wetter tolerant of the juniper, so it'll live on a wet site or a dry site, and tends to live along the river valley. If you've been to SMU, this is the tree that's recolonized those areas after the ponderosa pines were cut by the mill there. And they're growing incredibly close together, and I think that's a ponderosa in the background there perhaps, and that's just the typical, what's happening, what it's created is a fuel ladder and competition for the ponderosa to prosper. Those trees, again, they have their place, they have their niche, but in the current setting, they've become very invasive. I think they're quite a beautiful tree, and we used to plant them when I was a landscaper. Blue spruce is a protector of the watershed. This is taken in Taos Canyon. I think it's called Casita de Piedra, about 3/4 of the way up the canyon, that has a perennial spring that creates a little stream that runs down through this little area where we were doing a thinning project. These trees, again, it's really a riparian tree. You don't typically find spruces existing up on the hill slopes, more frequently in the bottom. And Colorado blue spruce is the full name, so they're more common in Colorado. But here in New Mexico, typically all along the upland streams, you'll find them. I think we sent one of these to Washington, D.C. for a Christmas tree a while back. Engelmann lives in the upper elevation forest above 9,500 feet, and its behavior in relation to fire was that when a really dry year would come, these forests burned in what's called a stand replacement fire, about every 300 years or so. We've been hiking, and it also up on the more rocky crags. This is a companion plant for bristlecone pine, and up on what we call La Cuchara, or the big spoon that's Pueblo land. We walked along there. You can walk right on the ridge outside of Pueblo land, and we did that, and there was quite an amazing number of dead, old, ancient, burned bristlecone and Engelmann up at that elevation that must have been good, I don't know, centuries ago, and a lot of it hadn't reseeded or regrown in trees. But this is a great protector of water too. This is the tree that's frequently found all around Taos Ski Valley, and in the upland meadows, and you'll see springs just emerge sometimes even right out from under an Engelmann spruce. So they grow really close together naturally, unlike the ponderosa, which grew in clumps with as few as 12 to 15 trees per acre. You can see this tree in its habitat with 40 inches of precipitation a year is going to grow much more closely together and prosper. Now down in the ponderosa belt, in some cases we have as many as 2,000 trees per acre, where historically there'd be a dozen or 40. This is a unique kind of in-between sort of a tree that prospers when you hike up in the El Salto area in the canyons there. There's some of these scattered, but there's never very many. That's what can I say about this tree? It's unique. It's a pine, so it's drought tolerant to some degree, but it does need more water than a ponderosa.
Is that strobiformis?
I couldn't tell you the Latin name on it. Okay. Southwestern white pine or limber pine in common nomenclature.
Okay.
Yeah. Highest elevation, perhaps the oldest in the world. So hardy. Low elevation again. Gamble oak's a companion plant, and so is serviceberry in the ponderosa belt. This area, when you see shrubs this big, there's a lot of this if you've been out toward Lumberton, past Chama, on the way to Pagosa Springs for a soak maybe. That area was all ponderosa pine forest, and now you'll just see a scattering of oak. We used to plant trees frequently. Dulce, the hickory Apache Indian Reservation, let contracts frequently, and we crawled around under oak that were 18 and 20 feet tall, interplanting ponderosa. And I understand those trees have prospered tremendously. I haven't been back, I'm embarrassed to say, but I understand that they're 25 feet and more tall. Those ponderosas really did well. But this is an indication that there's enough water to support an overstory forest. So when you see this, and I've traveled a little bit. I went to the Cayman Islands and I saw that, and I said, oh, there was a whole overstory here. This tells the tale that there was enough moisture to support a whole nother canopy level. And what happens is these plants become invasives in a way. They come to dominate the landscape. And actually, Gamble oak more than the others, and also New Mexico locust, is what mainly populates the eastern side of the Jemez now. And it's what it's subject to is a repeat fire cycle that makes it really hard for that forest to recover and become a strong forest. Great plants, part of a balanced ecosystem that would frequent you know, the more wetter areas. Here's a plant behaves a similar way, but up on the drier knolls. Beautiful curly leaf mountain mahogany. A lot of this up on the El Salto slopes. Great deer forage. So are those other two plants. Anybody got a comment so far, a question?
So, yeah, so you would say that generally speaking, wherever you see a lot of gambel oak with serviceberry, there's good ground moisture? Is that it?
I would say that, and not necessarily with serviceberry. That was a unique photo. They had them together. But that type of plant, you see how vigorous it is? And short. That just tells the tale. It's like burdock. Burdock in the valley, that's deep soil. That's deep, rich soil. That's a good place for an orchard. This is a good place for an overstory forest.
And so that's where you would plant ponderosa?
You would be probably returning that area to its, because that would be called a climax forest. See, there was a resilience, and I wanted to bring this up in discussion of the article. The notion of resilience is an ecosystem that can withstand an impact or a disturbance and still continue to prosper. Where the kind of disturbance that hit the east slopes of the Jemez with those multiple fires that they've had, that's impaired its ability to be resilient. Now it isn't. Resilience, it's a relatively stable but adaptable condition. I would suggest that the east slope of the Jemez is in a downward spiral. We're adding ponderosa pine to this would take it in an upward spiral, move it toward more diverse, more wildlife habitat, certainly more productive. Yeah. Does that touch on what you're saying? Yeah. Yeah, those principles I haven't. Serviceberry just happens to be in the frame, so I was kind of generalizing. You know where it's easy to see this is Valdez, the north-facing slope in Valdez, what they call the Sombrio. If you take that little drive through, it's beautiful, Valdez Valley, and look back, you know, they always say there's that acequia that people say runs uphill. Folks are familiar with that? That whole north face slope there is mostly gamble oak, but scattered in there's a few Douglas fir and ponderosa pine, which is an overstory climax forest. And I would suggest to you that the previous inhabitants of Valdez, and in fact this was proven the other day, the Arguellos, Carlos was telling me, he asked his grandpa, well, why'd you guys cut all the trees right around here? He said, why are we going to go to the other side of the gorge? When we've got vigas right here, we can cut vigas on firewood right here and drag them to the house with a horse. And of course it makes perfect sense. You would do what would seem more practical. So at any rate, that hill slope again is mostly characterized by gamble oak. So if you own some of that land and you wanted to take it up a notch, you could clear some oak and add some pine, and then you'd be progressing toward a more complex ecosystem. So this is all about water infiltration. Of course, beavers were pretty much extirpated or almost made extinct by 1825. And this effect on the landscape was all that water, it's super heavy. It's pushing into the sidewalls of the pond and into the ground. And then as soon as there gets to be a couple extra beavers, you know, they kick them out. And the beaver can walk overland pretty far. And they'll even walk up over a ridgeline and down into the next drainage, which may not be perennial. This is probably a perennial drainage. Doesn't have to be, but very likely. But a beaver will take a ephemeral drainage and can make it into a perennial drainage. So I call your attention to what's called the Rio Hondo, or the Arroyo Hondo, which is just past it's in the horseshoe curve going south. And if you look there, most often, most years, that's running water in the early spring into early summer. But once later in the summer comes along, it dries up. Maybe this year it was dry all year. But if beavers are living in that area, they'll stack up the water that did fall in precipitation the previous winter and store it, and they'll just let a trickle run out of every pond. And so that will be a perennial stream, and all the characteristic wildlife that could benefit from that and more complex plant life could benefit from that storage of water. So this is a great thing, and I suggest to everybody we should emulate these guys. Ben's working now on the Taos Land Trust land, and they're trying to work beavers into the equation. Are they already there, Ben?
They're there.
They're there. So you don't have to invite them. They're helping you trim back the Russian olives. Yeah. That's a tricky balancing act when we have preferred trees and beavers eat trees. How do you sort that out? So, and also the other thing, if your cabin's over on the side of that pond, you don't want that dam to build any higher. But yeah, there's measures. There's a thing called a beaver deceiver, which people are using, and of course caging trees. But anyway, beaver's awesome. So this is just a giant wick, you know, infiltrating water up in the highlands. Probably Engelmann spruce. It's our buddy. Busy as a beaver. The tail, that's interesting, the tail looks like a cow's tongue in a way. Cattle well managed, we're going to come to that. But I had never noticed that before, that tail is a lot like a beaver's, a cow's tongue. And cattle, they literally kiss the earth all day long. Once they get a belly full, then they chew up and they have a gut full of microbes that benefit the earth. But anyway, beavers busy in the mountains, holding the water back.
Wow.
Tarryall, up toward Lake City, past Lake City. Somebody know where it is exactly?
No, it says
Colorado, yeah.
Rocky Mountain National Park, RMNP.
Oh, so this is not the Tarryall, that's another one. Yeah, nature's not in a big rush to straighten out stream channels. And again, mentioning the work going on at the Taos Land Trust property on La Posta, I think they're going to be returning the stream returning meander to a stream that had been channelized. Most of the rivers in Taos have been channelized because we've had tremendous floods that have cost a lot of bridges and harmed a property. So pretty much ran excavators through most of the rivers. We're going to talk about that more. That forest on the left is, well, that's interesting. I don't know what to say about that. It's certainly more dense than a ponderosa pine forest here would be, and I don't think those are pines. I think that's a photo from the internet from a wetter place than this. It might be an upland photograph, you know, from higher elevation where that would be more appropriate. But it's definitely been worked. There's some stumps in the background. Beautiful. Little conversation about what happens locally with acequias. They say acequias are surrogates, in fact, to the previous beaver occupation because it diverts the water out and creates a whole riparian zone outside of the river channel. So all that water that's running along, it's barely sloped enough to run because they're trying to basically leverage the water out of the river to hold as high as they can to irrigate as much land as possible. So all the way along its channel of an earthen ditch, it's soaking into the ground and recharging the aquifer. And every time water is sheeted onto the landscape, it's also, something like 70% is returned to the river, but a lot of it goes in, some of it goes into the aquifer. Very little is lost to evapotranspiration, something less than 30%. That picture on the left is actually from Valdez. And the one on the right is from Cañon that you can see looking up Taos Canyon right there. And these are a couple I've had the privilege to be involved with rekindling, reviving these acequias that were somewhat asleep, especially the one on the right. Soaking the water into the landscape. Just a discussion briefly about livestock. Now, I read again, Jerry Yergin wrote another letter to the paper about the cattle in the Rio Fernando. Is everybody, folks familiar with that concern?
No.
Well, the cattle, so this arrangement here, when I put my cows in that field, it had already been irrigated and grown all the way to almost maturity. You see the seed heads on the plants? But not everybody enjoys the luxury of doing that. And of course, this is an incredibly wet year, unlike this year. But the idea is that when cattle move into a stand like this, they crop off the top down to a 4-inch stubble, and then they move on. And that's how buffalo used to behave on the landscape. And when the buffalo did that, they were kept moving by predators. But what we sometimes, let me finish the benefit of this. So the benefit is that the plant, once it loses its top, it prunes its own roots into the soil. So if you have grass this tall, and you prune it down to 4 inches, the plant does an equivalent behavior underground, and those become vertical shafts of decomposing carbon where water infiltrates into the landscape more readily, and that builds the soil. More carbon rich, more all kinds of complex web of interactions in the soil. As long as the cattle are taken and moved away and don't come back until the plants revive. But most of our landscape is so much livestock pressure on it, doesn't enjoy this luxury. So what happens in a case when you have a river system, it compromises the river system because you've lost the shade. The shrubs and the trees that are close to the stream are all beaten down and scratched on to where they can't recover. And the water, what happens is you get a flashy watershed as if there'd been a fire. So your forest isn't holding the soil, you're actually stream channel. And Taos Canyon is among one of the most degraded around here because it used to be the place where people who didn't have an allotment in the forest could send their cattle. It was like open range. So it got a lot of pressure. And a lot of rehabilitation's been done there way back in the 40s. So we talked about this, the whole beaver pressure, and change the way the landscape behaves. And this is a huge factor right here. So once the railroads came, especially in the 1880s, it was possible to ship sheep, as far as Chicago or more. So the way it was determined to make money in the Southwest, because it's pretty arid and hard to garden, hard to farm on any scale, it's not the Midwest, obviously, was pasturing. And they went at it in a big way, and I can tell you lots of stories about this, but the effect was that once the sheep finished off the grass, you see they crop it so low, well, then we lost our frequent fire restoration of the forest. Right? We lost the forest's ability to maintain itself was lightning and Native American starts of fire. Well, you can start a fire, but it isn't going to spread. It's not going to run. I just want to interject an amazing little fact right here. It's my understanding that there were buffalo in the Carolinas, and that was achieved by Native American burning. And you can Google that, and you'll see that it was a Anglo person that came that shot the last buffalo in South Carolina, I think, or North Carolina. But if you've ever looked at the book 1491 or 1493 by Charles Mann, he goes way into that, what a impact the native people had on the landscape. And that encourages me because our landscape is in a lot of trouble now, and we could very well, especially with our technology, make a huge difference at rehabilitating our landscape so it functions well again. Because these catastrophic fires are, oh my gosh. Forbes Park, just over the border in Colorado, lost 140 of 200 homes this last summer in the spring fire. And that's the kind of direct personal impact we're feeling, not to mention all these watersheds that are losing their canopy, due in large part to this really extractive approach. I'm not saying it'd be bad to graze. I think it's great. It's just measuring the grazing would be good. So, pause for thoughts, comments.
Fascinating new book by Professor Andy Gulliford from Fort Lewis College in Durango. It's called Woolly West. It just came out 6 weeks ago, and it goes into the long history and modern ecology of sheep in particularly Colorado. He's based there, but also there was so much movement in New Mexico, Wyoming, Utah, Basque, Hispanic, shepherds, sheep herders, and then the conflict with the cattle. Fascinating new book, Woolly West.
Woolly West.
By
Great.
Professor Andy Gulliford.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a good contribution, yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, and most of the kids I went to school here in Taos, their dads and or grandfathers went to what they called the sheeps. So
Yeah.
this area was largely grazed out by the time of those men in their working years. So they were going north where it wasn't worn out yet. In fact, that's how my family came to Taos, is they were shipping the ewes from the McCarthy Partido system to Kansas, and my grandfolks had a grocery store there, and they made friends with the Gonzaleses who were running those sheep, and they invited them to Taos, and so the family started coming in the 40s and now in the 50s, and now I'm lucky enough to live here. So Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Whoa.
Looks like the prairie dogs have gotten to it.
See them.
An interesting turn of events. I heard some folks came from Nova Scotia to follow the beaver because it was a boom when it was on. And this was settlers over on the other side of Ocate, near the Fevres River. And I said, Fevres, that sounds like that's a French name, or Fevre, I think, or something. And someone there, the Twin Wells Ranch, the folks there knew the history, and they said what happened there is the family came from Nova Scotia, but the beavers were trapped out, so they went right into logging. So. And there, yeah, we can talk about that a lot. Again, I'm actually an advocate of logging, but again, in measure to support resilience of the forest. And there's not as many examples as we'd like to see, but an increasing number, particularly among Native American tribes. The Mescalero in southern New Mexico, phenomenal forest. White Mountain Apaches, phenomenal forest where they've been logging their medium-sized trees for years in order to make every effort to recreate the pre-existing forest prior to 1850. And a huge part of what happens when you thin is the trees that remain there grow way faster. One of my early exposures to the benefits of thinning was at Groff Lumber in Albuquerque, and I was there looking for beams to build my house here, and Mr. Groff said, but I struck up a conversation about thinning, like I tend to do, and Mr. Groff said, oh, come to the yard, I want to show you something, and he took me outside, and there was a 16 by, great big timber. He said, check out the growth rings on that tree. And I looked, and I said, wow, it's growing really fast here at this point, but before that, it was growing really slow. He said, what do you think happened there when it went from the growing really slow to the growing really fast? I said, it must have been a change in the weather, a big uptick in moisture. And he said, no, that's when that area was thinned. So the growth was amplified tremendously. So we could have a logging industry here that would be, could be sensitively done, that would, I mean, I don't mean everywhere, but a lot of our forests that we see that are highly over congested and are subject to potential fire could be a working forest like they once were. They were all logged. It was all logged in the past.
Mark, what fireproof trees? Could you explain that?
Ponderosa pine and Douglas fir at the lower elevations have typically grow clear. That means they don't grow low branches. They grow them, but then they fall off, and then if frequent fire comes through, it burns them off. So, and they have typically a really thick bark. White fir will do that too, but it's an exception. More typically, they have low branches clear of the ground like junipers, so they're more a contributor to the fire. So when folks have had thinning done, we just spoke earlier about Taggers, got some work done up in Piedmont. The limbing up is an effort to make junipers and piñons more fire proof. But it's not the same as like the historic fireproof trees that were subject to periodic fire. Okay. I planted a lot of trees in forest land that looked like that on the west coast. I was surprised to go to the west coast where I thought I'd find the biggest trees ever and find out that my New Mexico mountains were wilder by far than northern mountains of California. Because right past what they call the beauty strip, it mostly looks like this. That's another way of creating an incredibly flashy watershed. That same thing happened to the Santa Clara watershed just south of here, but it was fire. Two fires, one right after the other. So that changed the equation and created an opening, right? There's nature. You know, you've heard that saying, and I never used to understand what it meant. Nature abhors the vacuum. I like to say, God likes lots of cover over the dirt, over the land. The land deserves cover. And so what does she do with that? Well, the forest that's next to it could shed some seed on it, but unless you go out in the middle of that and plant it, it's probably going to stay barren for a while until what's going to grow up? Invasives, bristly, stickery plants that can hold the soil. And then we'll come along and say, oh, that darn sagebrush, or oh, that darn, you know, out there in that country in California, that's whitethorn. Oh, it's ferocious. Pardon?
Red alder in Washington and Oregon.
Yeah. Or gamble oak and And yeah, they got the I'm forgetting, the New Mexico locust in New Mexico, yeah. Railroads hauling logs, you can see the logs on the, just behind the coal car there. Laid the landscape bare. You know, we went and picked cones once in grants. Great job. I was the 5th highest bidder, and all the other ones dropped out. We made like $600 to $800 a day. Best job I've ever had in my life. Climbing trees for $600 or $800 a day. So we climbed these big pines and collected the cones because they were going to replant the whole area. But we were just baffled about the forest. We said, why is there a square forest here in the middle of all this sagebrush desert? And they said, well, it was all forest. See the railroad bed right over there? They laid tracks up every drainage. That was the Blue Water Reservoir drainage over near Grants. They laid tracks up every reservoir, logged all the big trees off and took them away, and for some reason they left a tract of them alone. And so there they were, great big ponderosa pine with between 90 and 120 feet tall. Spectacular, still just there. So this is, you'll see Forest Guild, an organization out of Santa Fe that's doing a lot of positive work. I think that's where this came from, is they're bringing young people in and working with the Taos County Community Wildfire Protection Plan core team and Forest, the Santa Fe, the Cibola, and the Carson Forest are all collaborating to do this as much as we can. And because what this does is return historic resilience to the landscape. This is smoky. I want to, you know, toward the and what can I say? The idea is that this burns up the branches that are falling out of the tree, that it kills some of the little trees so there aren't so many. This has probably been thin before that, and then pile burned, in order to open it up enough to do this. But in the Valle Vidal last late March and early April, they burned 5,600 acres of thick forest with a helicopter, dropping what they call ping pong balls. And there's a few places where the fire went a little wild, but you could already see aspen sprouts coming up. In other words, it was just like 3 or 4 acres. But most everywhere where it burned completely, 3 or 4 acres, but mostly it just burned underneath and around the existing forest. It punched little holes in it so that if a fire comes to the area, there's gonna be something of a fuel break. So that was really a revelation for me and caused a lot of hope. That, because I mean, this costs $2,000 an acre to thin, that varies a lot. But let's say 600 to 2,000 an acre, or even to 2,500. But burning is way cheaper, so it's a risky to some degree. But they're planning way better because we've had bad accidents. That Bandolier fire was awful that went through Los Alamos. But this is super positive, and when the smoke comes around, I encourage everyone who can to be patient or step aside from the smoke or whatever it takes. Yes, ma'am?
What is it that keeps the land from here around from the Pueblo, from the fire that happened a lot of years ago? Why hasn't it regrown?
Where the Encebado fire burned?
I don't know what
Up on the hill slope?
But right here, what we can see when we step outside.
Right.
The land just behind the Pueblo that goes up, all the way down to the canyon.
Right. It takes a long time to reclothe itself. Yeah, it's decades and decades. There's that triangular fire that's up over here that was burned in the early 60s, and it still hasn't reclothed, except for when you go up close, you'll see that there's aspens. And it grows back. See, this is more of a middle-aged forest, and those are still young now, that they've had a big disturbance happen to them.
So there's not been anything human intervention?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
I know they had to deal with a lot of debris flows in the Pueblo and flooding subsequent to that fire, so that's where they concentrated their investment, was in check dams and accumulation ponds and so forth. But up on the slope, I can't tell you. I can tell you an interesting story about that relates to the wisdom of Indian and Native American burning.
I'd love to hear it.
Thank you. A buddy of mine is on the core team where we talk about fire every quarter, and he said when the tribe went hunting for game for their Kiva boys, they're only allowed to eat native food during their year and a half of participation in traditional ways. When they went hunting, they went up in the forest, up behind the Pueblo, you know, where it's thick. Apparently, now it's been surveyed, they're pretty sure it's one of the thickest forests in the West. Real concern. They didn't find game. Then they went into the open area, the Encebado area that you're talking about.
Okay.
They found the game they needed there. So it's ironic that it looks like a scar, but it's a component of the healthy forest that's missing. Because the whole landscape was laid bare through sheep and logging, and I can't say that's true universally, but in many areas it was hit hard, and we don't see it now because there's 30, 40, 50 years of regrowth on it. Some high school students did a survey of Guyana Canyon trees, and they only found one in a particular area that was 60 years old. All the others were 40 or less. So this huge, thick, dark green that we see everywhere is quite a new phenomenon, quite different than what was historically there.
Thank you.
I have a question
Yeah.
about carbon. Is that good or negative or positive regarding carbon sequestration?
Right. Great question. Vigorously growing trees are sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere constantly. A barren area devoid of grass and healthy plants at all isn't really doing that, right? So encouraging ecosystem processes that foster a diverse, multi-story carbon sequestering ecosystem is really a positive thing. So the carbon that's being released by the smoke from the grass, well, that's captured carbon. I mean, in other words, it was taken up first by the grass, and so it's an even exchange. It's just giving back. So all of these interventions, treatments, and so forth, that is a part of the consideration, is trying to establish a system that'll have be able to participate in the carbon balance with the atmosphere as much as possible. Going back to that Gamble Oak and New Mexico locust taking over a burned over area, not nearly as much carbon sequestration as there is in a tree grass community. It's too one-story, too flat, and susceptible to burn again, and then you release all that carbon again. So, yes, sir.
I was just going to say that particular fire that she's asking about, the reason that one particular never got its vegetation back was it had been suppressed for so long when the fire did come, temperature got to such an extreme level in that fire that it killed off every seed that was out there, including usually the fire-resistant ones. So this thing's basically starting from scratch. Or a normal fire like this, you know, it's a good thing for it. That was suppressed so long that the temperatures got just to a level that pretty much reached the whole area.
Really good point, yeah. That's called high severity, right? High severity fire? Yeah. Where this is low severity. And then what they were trying to foster in the Valle Vidal, I think, is kind of mixed severity, where you have some intense burns and some low and medium. And that the best science we have says that's with the historic behavior of the forest that kept its balance. Are you a firefighter, sir?
I was on that fire, yeah.
Yeah. I heard it was one of the scariest fires.
Nasty, all those draws up there with all the chimneys.
Yeah.
You know, those old trees, all that stuff had been cleared in 60, 70 years. It's like
Right.
trying to fight a fire inside a box of matches.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, you can only really work at night, right?
Yep, and underneath it, you can't really go above it. You know, you just have to kind of keep it away from it.
Oh, right, because it go up after you.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Super dangerous. Yeah, one of the guys that we worked at told me, he said we go out there and work the night, and then into the morning, and by 2 o'clock it chases back to our safe zones, even earlier sometimes.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. He said, well, it was July. And a really dry summer. So this is just what the gentleman brought up. It's like a powder keg, because this was official policy of the Forest Service for many years. I don't bring this up to criticize them. The Forest Service has really come around. Carson's rewriting its forest plan. It will be complete here soon. And they've included all kinds of efforts toward promoting resilience. But this was an error. The wholesale logging of all the big trees, that was an error too, promoted by a misunderstanding of science. Basically, the thinking was, if we don't cut all these big trees, the United States is going to run out of wood. So we need to cut all these big trees down because they're not really growing very fast. I didn't understand that the multi-storied complex ecosystem is incredibly productive. But they've come around on all that. So we with the Taos County Wildfire Protection Team, we collaborate closely with them, and it's coming along. It's really a lot of progress. 2 areas that are going to get a lot of attention in the next few years. What the Forest Service has to do now, because they were sued, and the environmentalists, well, they got sued many times, but the environmentalists got the National Environmental Policy Act passed, and so they have to go through a complex process of making sure that any treatments are beneficial and that there isn't a compromise of values. And so 2 areas that have been cleared, we call it cleared, or are underway. One is clear now, and it's about 9,000 acres all behind Valdez and Gallina Canyon all the way to San Cristobal, where David lives. And then the area that's getting worked on a lot now is the area it's called McGaffey Ridge, Rio Grande del Rancho, and that's up out toward Pot Creek, up behind SMU. And that's another big block of land. And then it'll be years of incremental work on that, because the Forest Service they just don't get lots of money handed to them to take care of things, although there is some hope that will tick up. So, David, you want to say something about what's going on out on the Gallina Canyon, San Cristobal area?
Yeah, sure. It's actually, as of this last week, become a really interesting project for the restoration part, because there's effort that Mark's part of, that I'm part of. J.R. Logan, if you remember his article from the Taos News, he was a grant author that's getting a lot of locals who depend on firewood for either their trade or just for their winter use, access to the forest, specifically to thin, but to benefit from that thinning effort by taking that wood home. Diego is here, my neighbor. His dad is actually unable to come tonight, but his dad is the assistant mayordomo on that project, and it's using the acequia model where we self-regulate ourselves. It's experimental. Everybody going into it knows that there's a lot of good potential for it. We're going to see how it goes by having thinning done by the local community and some of the regulation on what trees are taken, how much area is cleared over what period of time. That will be done with a mayordomo model, so self-system. On the flip side, and this is closer to Mark, your experience, but there's a thinning crew based out of Michoacan that is extremely fast, very centralized, opposed to our decentralized community model where everyone's going up and we get an acre with a block program. They're coming with a crew of 24 people. I talked to their supervisor earlier this week. I think there's at least 12 chainsaws, Mark. I don't know if you've
I'm all ears.
see some of their work elsewhere. So they are thinning on the San Cristobal side. The community work is just above Valdez and the Gallina Canyon side. If people are familiar with that, the north slope above Valdez. And it'll be a fascinating comparison between thinning approaches. One is, sort of a lot of local investment, less efficient though. And this other one that we're seeing on the San Cristobal south slope is extremely efficient. And we are benefiting because there's firewood left for us. Locals are encouraged to go out and get our permits and we can collect the wood. But gosh, Mark, I think they cleared like 18 acres in 2 days. Wow. Flying through, and I was curious about their interpretation of the prescription. Anyway, getting into more details, those 9,000 acres that Mark alluded to that are to be treated, to try to restore a natural fire regime, is a pretty large zone with some important watersheds around there. Historical beaver presence in the Arroyo Hondo, as well as supposedly the San Cristobal Creek. So we're looking forward to seeing what happens. And my big curiosity is, after growing up there during the Hondo fire, and the wildlife that came in afterwards, is on forb and grass return. And during this thinning process, what's the understory growth like, and how can that how well the grasses and the herbs that come back help hold the soil, in case we get extreme rain events.
So you're not reseeding at all with native?
We're not directly through the project that I'm part of on the Valdez side, nor to my knowledge are the contractors in the other parts at this point.
The general consensus is that the seed bank of natives is there.
Seeds
You just can't, it's suppressed by the light. In the case where you have an extreme fire like happened in Lama or in Sabato, well, that compromises that to some degree. But a big part of the project there is protecting those communities from catastrophic fire and their water supplies. So a myriad, a host of benefits, local employment, and then that big crew you're talking about, that's a contract, a U.S. Forest Service contract.
Yeah. And
Is how they're managing that.
I haven't met them before, but I gather they did work on the far side of Pablo Flechado as you head down towards Angel Fire.
Mm-hmm.
I was told it was an international crew there as well.
Good. Well, from my point of view, all hands on deck.
Well, and
It's a big,
Well,
what I gathered right away too from a fire safety, I'm glad you brought it up. There's people's homes 30 feet from where this crew's sitting, and that's, I think, why they put that crew in that area, is they really wanted to address the fire danger.
yeah.
In case we had a westerly wind rip up and take out a few homes.
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, 12 sawyers. How many swampers?
I think
How are they stacking it? Where are they piling it? How big are the piles? I mean,
Big
that
piles.
much acreage in so few days is pretty phenomenal.
it is. Yeah, really big piles. They had about 6 to 8 foot piles. My only criticism was they had a lot of heavies in them, large diameter
Yeah,
wood,
yeah.
which is bad for the winter burn,
Yeah.
but it also is stuff that we want for our fireplaces. And I think they made that change right away.
Oh, yeah.
Is they were given instructions to pile everything, and I think now they're letting some of the stuff sit by the side. Their concern was they'd get in trouble if they left it, but they saw a lot of trucks line up pretty quickly and make good use of anything they left out.
And what was the name of that outfit again?
I'm not too sure. They're based out of Michoacan, Mexico.
Okay.
And like farm workers, they're not residents up here. They come up here directly for the work.
On temporary works.
And great guys to talk to, fascinating, very open. Their foreman was very open to talk to, but I believe they have contracts all over the West. They were flying to Santa Fe the day we had snow up here, just to stay busy.
It's not the graybacks? Is that what they call themselves?
I don't
There's a
know.
number of those. We used to be one of those when we were a tree planting crew, travel all over the West and
Yeah.
follow the government contracts.
Their van was based out of Oregon, so.
Yeah, right, that's the,
Maybe.
yeah. That's probably graybacks. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a plan to collect data on the regrowth, grasses and forbs? Is there a baseline of what was there before? What's the regeneration monitoring plan?
In the case of the Valdez project, Mark alluded to high school students. Those are students I'm working with, and we're actually out Friday to collect a lot more data. We will do that. I'm glad there's interest in it. I don't think we have a lot of Forest Service requirement to look at that, because I feel like they have their biologists sort of with their ears to the ground. But it'd be a great opportunity for students, and it relates to erosion control, and I have a student really interested in soil erosion and forest restoration. So we'll then do that, as well as stand change.
Yeah, I mean, these are projects that would be great for the local universities
Yeah.
as well, a little bit more in-depth research-related stuff, and for long-term management planning.
Yeah, I think the Forest Guild, and Mark, you could probably speak well to this, might be a good contact to some of the universities. But we do have a professor from Highlands coming up, mentoring us, and then New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute, which tied loosely to Highlands, but they are the repository for all the restoration data in the state.
They surveyed the unit we did in El Salto, took plant
Yeah.
before and after, yeah. So there's some folks involved in that. Plenty of room, plenty of job opportunities in this.
Yeah, plenty of mentorship for community members, especially if you want to mentor high school students in identifying grasses.
I can hear Jan saying, maybe you should make sure we finish the talk. Yeah, go ahead.
No.
Briefly.
Yeah, the McAfee survey that you mentioned in the field lead report, right now the survey is going on the McAfee Ridge and stuff.
Yeah,
So we're doing all the survey stuff up there, but we definitely do have, we're required to do an inventory of the old growth, the new growth, seedlings, and saplings, gets multiplied out to a big model, but every single place that we go, we record by species size, and we do it every 10 years. So we'll have a pretty solid before and after, I think.
Great. And that's, who's doing that?
I work with the Forest Service for contractors up here too. We're the ones doing the surveys
Yeah.
and marking.
You were working for the contractors that had that contract? Oh,
Yeah,
right.
I lead the contract crew for the survey.
Oh, good. And that's I know there was a couple, or one, at least one previous that went by the wayside, but you guys are
Yeah, it was a company out of Colorado called Espinosa.
that's who's doing it?
Yeah.
He's getting it done. Is it
Yeah.
still underway or has a ways to go?
Still going, got 2 years to go still.
Oh, you do? Oh, it's big, yeah. Oh, yeah, of course, the NEPA process takes like 3 years, okay.
So I'm curious, this Taos Water and Conservation Program where private landowners such as
Taos Soil and
ours-
Water Conservation District Cost Share Program, yes ma'am?
The cost share program where they're helping us thin our trees on our lots.
Mhm.
Are they keeping data on that and where it's happening and how many homeowners are having this done and the number of trees and?
I'm glad you asked about that, so folks that don't know about that can be aware of it. And typically Taos Soil and Water, let me answer your question first. They could always do more, but I think Taos Soil and Water, and I can't speak for them, but Tony was on their board for a long time and I was for a short time. Taos Soil and Water is just busy. They are doing so much work. And I know they keep track of the projects they've done,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that right, Tony? Yeah. So we don't have, but as far as surveying, I don't think they're as in-depth as the U.S. Forest Service as far as taking plant counts and so forth. They try and keep a good forester on staff and enable programs. The thinning is just generally understood to be a good thing, and working with the homeowners of the county, the taxpayers of the county is Soil and Water's mission, so yes, they're doing that. So anyone who may be interested in applying, it's quite easy. They have the beautiful new building on Salazar and Chamisa, and then if this strikes your fancy, I'm sure folks know people who have forest land, or you happen to go to a dinner party or visit with them, or neighbors. Talk it up. If you're so inclined, it's a good thing, and the district is always looking for viable projects. And then if somebody owns more land than 3 acres, that's about the largest project Soil and Water will help you with. You can apply at the NRCS office for EQIP money, and that's just up the street in the BLM building. So they typically handle properties
That are larger.
5 acres and larger. And that can be achieved by combining neighbor properties. But they're not so much about working in neighborhoods. It's more about forest tracts. And they can be adjacent to a neighborhood. But yeah.
So this Taos Soil and Water, what is it that they do? Do they come out and survey the property? Do they actually come out and cut down trees? I'm
Yeah.
not sure what they do.
So first step is an application from a homeowner to ask for assistance. And then a forester comes and visits with the homeowner and makes an evaluation. Part of it's a visit is the homeowner interested enough in the benefit that the Soil and Water District is suggesting. There's a lot of flexibility there, but there are some general terms. They've turned people down because their roof was too flammable. You need to take steps yourself. So that fellow put pro panel on his roof, he went and applied again, and he got accepted because it's everybody together. Then once the project is approved in general terms by the board, then you have a green light to get a contract, a prescription drafted by the forester. And typically people will walk around with the forester if they're interested about what the trees they want to keep and save or willing to remove. And so that gets all worked out, and then there's a treatment plan, and then it goes out to bid. And contractors bid. The Soil and Water District administers the bid process in collaboration with the homeowner, and then in the end pays a positive inspected project about 70 to 85%,
It's
depending.
about 85%.
Is it 85 is what you got just recently? I know Peter was talking about.
Maybe it varies, I don't
Yeah,
know.
well,
Yeah.
I'm just putting an asterisk there because I don't want to overcommit, but yeah, people have gotten 85%. Yeah, so it's mostly paid for. So it's not like And it's the same with NRCS. These agencies want to help, and they recognize it's your land, the homeowner's land. It has to strike some sort of a balance.
But it is really all about fire defense, and they encourage people who are living up in trees, such as a lot of us do up in the foothills, that those are the ones they're gonna give a nod to usually.
Yeah, help as best they can, sure. That's good on that? We're good on that? Soil and water? Yeah. And NRCS has a similar program, but there's a little more lead time in the application. Process is a little more complex because it's a bigger assistance. But their assistance isn't quite 85%, but it's significant. So you can imagine the fire that would get caught up in that in a dry year. It's just going to be 60, 80 foot flames, and you're going to lose every single tree. So this is the kind of thing we're trying to fix. That's called dog hair. It's one of the nicknames for it. Doesn't typically look exactly like that around here, but certainly that's the way part of Llama looked before it burned in the Jemez too. And you get over the other side of the mountains in toward Mora, it's like that too. And there's your outcome. Very unnatural fire at lower elevation. This is a picture of a town that was saved. It's not immediately evident here, but we're going to come to the evidence. Here's the Encebado fire you were asking about earlier. My wood pile in the foreground. Well, a lot of people don't want the wood. Can you take that away, please? Okay. So I take it, and then we have winter work. We cure it and cut it up and sell it in the wintertime. That's the Blackstone Ranch in the background. That was a July 1st start, wasn't it? 2003?
Yeah. 4th, yeah.
Was it 4?
4th.
Yeah. Right. Well, the camera thinks it was 2003, but whatever. It was hot and dangerous. We're
It
glad
was
they
the
put
4th
it
of
out.
July, though.
It was the what?
It was the 4th of July.
4th. It was the 4th. So this is from the fire, Llama fire. What's the Hondo fire, right? Is the name of it.
Little sticks.
So you see what's happened here? So everything burned, and then there was no more cover. Now, before all those trees grew, there was no cover then either. That's why when you go in the forest, if you can walk between the trees, if they're not too close together, you'll see there's arroyos everywhere. There were arroyos everywhere before the fire cycle that's happening now, because the whole landscape was laid bare for quite a period of time. I was in a permaculture class where they said there were no arroyos in New Mexico before 1850. Can you imagine? The landscape was stabilized with grass and trees and shrubs. There's an arroyo in the middle of, I think it's Silver City. It went down 100 feet in 2 years. It's right down the middle. There's 2 one-way streets. And that was a result of super heavy precipitation and the uplands being denuded, over-harvesting of everything. So the flashy watershed is one where all the water runs off. It doesn't do what it did in the previous slides where we had the beavers. So when we tolerate some smoke in the air, or we get our trees cut, or we visit with our neighbors and encourage folks to participate, this is the kind of thing we can prevent. How does that repair itself? That's right after. What that is a 1-inch rainstorm shortly after that Hondo fire burned. Ron Gardner, who I can't say enough good about, took these slides and then sent me over to see Greg Miller to follow up. They teamed up and went up in there early, kind of on their own, right behind. They said, it's raining on that fire, let's go see what's going on. Fish in the Rio Grande, I think, down for several dozen miles all died. See how blackened all that is? Imagine all that sheet flow off of there. Classic head cut. Even if there's grass on the top, the water falls down, undercuts the bank, the grass and the soil all fall in, and then gradually it works its way upstream. You can see this on Maestas Road in the Weimar area. There's Dos Arroyos is one of the subdivisions there, but if you look carefully, drive through there slowly, and look uphill, there's an arroyo in there with a classic head cut like that. Now the arroyo's already 18 feet deep at least, But anywhere there's a place like that, that's gonna happen. That's just gonna march uphill until it hits bedrock, or there's nothing to stop it because it undercuts that.
That's where I live, yeah.
Yeah, so you see those arroyos
That's
there?
scary.
Yeah,
It's very deep.
yeah. Yeah, and
I've been
nothing,
watering the trees down there.
so that's a result of the denuding of the landscape, and so, you know, working to repair that sort of thing is possible. I mean, that's a bigger discussion. There's a whole field, so what's happening with this thinning is there's an industry forming in support of restoration. And then there's also an industry that supports restoration of streams, induced meandering, healing head cuts. It's quite involved. And Quivira Coalition's the easiest source to Google to follow that. But there's contractors and a whole field of study and innovation, and it's going to be happening locally. You can visit the, does your park have a name?
Rio Fernando Park.
Rio Fernando Park, of course. Taos Land Trust. So you can visit there, and one of the experts in the field, Steve Ruman, is participating in that. I just noticed in the paper last week. Yeah, fantastic. So this thing can be fixed, but better not to mess it up in the first place if we can help it, huh?
Yes.
We're kind of behind the 8 ball right now. This is a picture of Guyena Canyon from a thinning unit we did just the other day. There's no work in evidence there, but what's great about this, I love this picture. You can see the side of El Salto in the background. See the trees in there that look like spires? They look like alpine trees, and then all the low rounded trees. Well, the low rounded trees are all juniper and pinon, and the ponderosa is the more spire-like trees. That's the re-emerging forest. So it's trying to heal itself, but it's all so congested there. This is such a powder cake. Now sublimation, what that means is it's a conversion of from a liquid to a gas. And what happens when precipitation falls on this, you get a heavy March snowstorm on that. You have a closed canopy forest, and so the snow lands on the canopy, and the sun comes out the next day, and it's 50 degrees, and a third of the water will evaporate and never reach that. It'll never be able to recharge the aquifer. It won't support the forest either. All those trees are competing. That tree, and that tree, and that tree, if those were the only ones in that frame, that'd be a lot healthier forest. Strikingly different from what you see right there, right? And a little hard to get used to. I've had to get used to it too. When I started this, I was like, oh, save that one too. Oh, save that one too. Now I'm like, let's create some space here. I don't want to hear it. And I've gone back to thinning units we did 3 years before, and the trees are all touching again. One unit in Pagosa Springs regained its basal area, which is the how many square feet of stumpage there is in 5 years. They thinned it, opened it up, and there was so much more water available to the existing trees. It went right back to where it was 5 years before. Less trees, but still too close together. So you can see so this is the area we're talking about, right, David?
Mm-hmm.
This is exactly, the forest land is back, that's like a bench, and then you have the upslope, you know? So the forest land's on the upslope, but I think most of the work's going to happen more on the same bench, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, rather than above the toe slope. This is sort of true and sort of not. One thing that contributes to insect infestations is tree planting in China. They planted poplars all over northern China to reclothe the landscape. Then, because it was a monoculture, lots of them died. Subject to this, do we know the name of the insect? The long-nosed bark beetle or something? Long barks. And so they cut the trees down and made it into boxes, and China ships things all over the world. So that particular beetle that got a huge start in a monoculture in China went everywhere. This is Rio Grande National Forest lost 85% of their upland spruce cover a few years ago. It looks just like that. Should we harvest those trees?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Good for firewood.
Well, they're big trees like this.
Oh, shit.
If you burn.
Shouldn't we use the same participatory management maybe that we're talking about doing with thinning, where we...
But would they be clean to use?
Oh, the tree, there's a good question. This isn't that simple, is it? There's always these... That's a good question. You could kiln dry them and that would solve that.
Yeah.
Colorado sure capitalized on their beetle kill spruce.
They've been cutting
Yeah.
a lot of dry, in Utah too. Yeah.
Mm. For more
or if they will. They're wondering if the hay maize will come back.
centuries.
We're gonna come to some slides that says that some places they don't. This is the same latitude as us, similar elevation. People have lived there far longer. The last animal they send in is the goat, because the goat will actually eat scrub. I love goats. Sheep, cows, all of them. It's all about management. It's all about management. But that's what will finish off a landscape. All just gullied. So this is what we have to work with. It's my son up in a thicket in Taos Canyon.
It's thick.
F for forward. So here's a job we did last winter for BLM with collaboration of state forestry. All this work is collaborative. There's many entities involved. You see the ponderosa pines sticking out of all the scrub is taken out, and we piled it there. That's a misleading picture about how big the pile is and about how close it is to that tree. They pretty much want you to do a 4x4x4 pile, and then I think before they burn them, they settle, because it's green when you pile it. But so this is post-treatment. You can see the space. You can see some blue sky between the trees.
You're not required to take that wood out of the forest?
No. We separate the heavies from so that's anything bigger than 3 or 4 inches from the burn piles. The burn piles is all called slash, small stuff. And it's left there. It's federal land. Only people that can burn on federal land are federal employees. Maybe you folks noticed us burning in El Salto on Monday and Tuesday? I don't know. There were smoke spires.
Yeah, I was wondering if that you.
I do that for many reasons. For one thing, that job is pending until it gets wet, right? My other reason for doing that, one of the other reasons is, well, I love it. I grew up skiing. Snow outside means you go outside, right? And so we get to go play even though it's 1 or 2 inches of snow. But the other reason is just it just throws up a banner. Hey, this is the time for this. This is a good, safe time to do this. A couple weeks before that, they had some scares because people burnt in Guyana Canyon when there wasn't moisture on the ground. And they had a fire walk away, and somebody had to run up there and put it out. So we have to be careful with this. But in moist conditions, easy.
What about chipping in place?
Hugely expensive.
Yeah.
Hugely expensive. And this is all inaccessible. This is all walk-in unit here. But yeah, chipping. The other thing about chipping, so it's got its place. It's a handy thing in what they call the WUI, the wild and urban interface, close to homes. It can work. You can also burn pretty close to homes too without any problem. But sometimes it's better when it's dry. We didn't burn anything this summer. There was a couple of days we did, but mostly we chipped. So it's practical for those times, but it's vastly more expensive. And we have our question about carbon earlier. That's a bunch more carbon. You had to buy fuel to support the machine, and you have to stand in a cloud of carbon monoxide while it's going on. I'd much rather smell wood smoke. So cost and accessibility would probably be the tremendous big two. But let me add a third one in there. Hauling those chips away it's so much volume. So what we end up doing is scattering it on the landscape sometimes, where you haven't really taken it away. So you might do a thinning like this, and you chipped all that material and spread it all around, and it looks real pretty. It's gorgeous, in fact. And but if a fire comes, what they're saying is that the chips burn for 2 or 3 days after the fire burns through. Sure enough, it didn't crown. It didn't turn into a crown fire, but the smoldering chips for 2 or 3 days at 200 degrees kills the roots of the trees, and you lose your forest anyway. So it's kind of like, should we harvest the logs with beetles in them? Yeah, maybe not. I mean, we just got to think this through. So that's one of the side effects of chips. So then you're faced with, well, I guess we have to haul it away. It starts getting pretty impractical. There are machines called masticators that'll do this too, and you have the same problem with that if they grind up all the heavies. So the best plan, what David's working on with J.R. Logan and the community, the Cerro Negro Forest Council, the local mayordomos and commissioners, it's small potatoes, but that together with wood access from professional contract thinning is probably a pretty smart way to go about it. Yeah, better than better than,
Isn't there a mulching effect from the wood chips? Doesn't that benefit something?
Yeah.
pardon me?
I say, isn't there a mulch, when you have chips on the ground,
Right.
you have a mulch effect. You're preserving the moisture in
Yeah.
the ground.
It's a really, it's an
There's some
advantageous,
benefit there that counterweighs to that other.
yeah, good point.
negatives you
It's
said.
a carbonaceous material and it's beneficial. Where we really need it is in agriculture, down here in the valley, mixed with nitrogen. Because we have a really high pH in our soils, and more carbon in the soil would be really positive. There's a transport problem. In a context like this, you already have needles all over the forest floor. And there's going to be more because every fall there's needle drop. It's just about the amount. So if you had an area where...
Trees dying, in the drought now, the persistent drought.
Uh-huh.
And I always hope that those chips are helping us preserve the life of the trees,
It's all about setting.
even after they've been thinned.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. So you'd have to balance that with the risk of the fire. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. And in fact, we are encouraged to leave debris on the landscape when it's a barren sort of a landscape. And some are. It's rocky and barren and there's hardly any cover on the soil. So we do just that. We typically, it isn't chips, but we do that too. If we can shoot the chips toward the bare ground, that's where to do it. But I just try and never cast them on, when under these trees there's that big, permaculture calls it a nebka, the dome of needle buildup that the mycorrhizal fungi lives in. I don't think we need to add to that. But your point's well taken. If we could mix and match, then we should. It's a good idea. Yes, ma'am.
I got a large load of mulch from Kit Carson
Uh-huh.
that was delivered up to the Weimer area because I have nothing, just very rocky soil. But I did call and ask if that was a fire hazard.
Uh-huh.
And they said it's probably, okay.
I think so.
I spread it out.
In that context.
Trying to enrich the soil and keep the moisture in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Weimer's an interesting area. Weimer's becoming a woolly area, wild and urban interface. Do you notice all the pignons in there?
Yeah.
All mixed all through there? Going all the way to Soil and Water's office. The pignon trees are really pushing into the valley. And between the tall sage and the pignon in Weimer, I would be seriously concerned if I lived there. I think and Soil and Water is all ripe for application to Soil and Water for assistance, because they've done jobs in there. But we need a whole new methodology for dealing with big sage, because Tony, you've dealt with a lot of sage on your place, but it's not as big as what was up there, right? You have dealt with big sage? Not so much.
So should we take the sage out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Continuity of fuels is a high risk in any setting, especially you have a year like this year,
But it's holding the soil down.
right? So you don't want to lay the soil bare, so how do you strike the balance, right? Yeah, sagebrush came in as a response to a bruising. So the landscape was growing grass this tall in wet years, and it was falling over because it wasn't all getting eaten, so there was a mulch layer every year, and periodically fire would burn through across the top. But all that mulch layer and those living plants, those living plants maintained a healthy soil condition, and then the sheep came along. And the sheep and the hooves, and you got bare soil. So nature said, oh my gosh, we've been laid bare, what should we do? Oh, sagebrush. So now the sagebrush has prospered from these wet years, and you've got what's called fuel ladder or fuel continuity. So it's a concern. So really it would be better to try and move that landscape back toward a perennial grass community with a nice barrier around your homes. I have some handouts from New Mexico State Forestry, and you can look at them on the web about defensible space. But I just want to point out that even though we're in the urban area, it's a real concern. Where my friend Bert Lippa lives, he doesn't have problems because he has a mowed, lush landscape that's down in the irrigated land. But those places that have overgrown grass leaning up against lattia fences, and all this fire, especially this year, who wasn't nervous?
Yeah.
I was nervous. We spent a bunch of time around my house pushing it back. So yeah. So how to diminish the sage and still have cover on the ground? Yeah. And it's all about continuity. When it's bush, clear to your eave of your home, that's just not safe.
What authority can enforce those kind of practices, fire-safe practices? Let's say in unincorporated areas of the county.
County
We
just,
live under El Salto, out of the forest,
uh-huh.
but there's rabbit brush and sage, continuous, up
Mhm.
against houses. People don't want to cut it because
Mm.
it's pretty, or,
Yeah.
you know. Is there an authority to enforce such safety?
The county land use regulations just changed, and I haven't read them, but I'm told that they mandate new home construction to clean around the property.
How about
In the
existing-
forest, do you
existing
know about
homes?
that? And is it, so, I don't think so, not existing. I mean, you're down to your neighborliness. Best of luck.
The
And
intelligent,
homeowners associations is
Well,
really what
yeah.
I'm thinking about.
But it's a lot, it's like the Asekis, you know, it's like, how can we work together on, is this a concern to you? Have a visit, have some tea, have some coffee.
the people that end up paying would be your fire insurance company. So they would, if they were rational, they would come out and check.
But private property rights are,
Property-
that's a
property.
long conversation we're gonna just step
Yeah.
aside from. Yes, ma'am.
Such a risk management action.
Yeah.
About the sage,
Mm-hmm.
it is a cleanser, and it does help clean the air,
Mm-hmm.
and not many people know this, but we have chemtrails, and they kind of were prevalent a couple days ago, and the sage actually helps clear the air from those toxins.
Plant life does purify the air, and I'm not saying get rid of all the sage. In fact, for years I've said don't tear it out unless you're gonna put something better there.
Yeah.
But then we had a summer like we just had,
Yeah.
and I would say, we wanna ask ourselves, is this a fire hazard for my home and my community? And weigh those values out. That sound good? Kind of a middle. So this is stepping back from that previous photo. This is immediately post-treatment. They actually, BLM sent us back in to thin it like it is now because they said the first time there was a section, it probably was right here, where they didn't feel like it was thin enough. But they said it is now. Yeah, space between the trees. This is if you go to Wild and Scenic Rivers and you look at the north side of what's called Guadalupe Mountain, you'll see that. There were 3 contractors there, did 200 acres. So this is at the corner of Guyana Canyon and Turkey Springs Road, if anybody happens out that way. And our crew, well, Soil and Water did a job here initially, and they go at the work with kid gloves. They don't want to any buyer remorse. So there were more trees than that there, which is a good thing because Soil and Water has a great reputation. But there were more trees there, and we think we should cut some more and see if. And so now this is subject to review by you folks today and anybody that goes by there in the Forest Service to see if they think it's open enough. We have a firefighter in the room. Do you think this is open enough to drop a fire from the canopy to the ground?
I don't have much undergrowth there. Probably all right.
Yeah. It still looks pretty busy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We cut a lot of trees out of there. And that was the second visit to it.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, a photograph, it's hard to take a picture of a thinning unit, but
Right.
that's the idea, is to have some space. Now, for some people, this is too far apart, don't you think? You could see your neighbor.
That's our problem now.
You have to get curtains now.
Now we're gonna build a, no, we're not gonna build a fence, but.
Well, actually, that's what's going on. The job we worked on Monday, Tuesday, the fellow's building a fence. He was already doing that. But because he's opened the forest to where he feels like his home is safe, now he can see the road. And they'd like their privacy, so he's building a fence. I actually think that's part of the solution. And a neat fence I've seen lately is half corrugated tin and half wood, so you don't have so much more wood if you're adding to the forest. Kind of an, it's very tasteful, it's stylish. So this is a feller buncher. We worked with one of these on the West Moreno Ranch over by Bobcat Pass. It seems so brutal, doesn't it?
Wow.
So what does that do?
It yanks, like,
Yanks the
He's
numerous,
got a saw right here at the bottom.
Cuts
yanks
it
a
off
bunch
and
Grabs a hold of it, so it cuts it and grabs one and goes to the next one and still got a hold of the first one and grabs a hold of the second one and cuts it until it's got a bundle of 10, and then it lays it over, and then a skidder comes, which is a great big dune buggy looking 4-wheel drive thing with tires this tall. and grabs a hold of that with a grapple and drags it down to a landing where it gets processed. I think this is a good thing.
So on your going back to that demonstration for us that you showed us a picture of and asked us if that's very open, you're not doing any seeding of any kind of native plants down, or small native plants or grasses below, or is that recommended, or is it going to be tried?
That's a great question. So there was a corner there where we did a volunteer project years ago, up by the road. It's on the left. And then Soil and Water did their job, and then we came and did this. And the silviculturist for the Carson was here when we were kind of laying this out. And Gabe said, look here, look at all these grasses coming in here. This is great grass response. And that was the area that we treated maybe 10, 12 years ago. So the seed bank is probably there. And to be perfectly honest, we're not looking for new ways to spend money because it's already so expensive. But we're counting on some revitalization, some comeback and it worked there. So there were bunch grasses, and I don't know if I have photos today, but I've seen that in other places where we opened it up, and some of the showy grasses, great big bear, what my dad used to call bear grass, would come back. So we're hopeful that'll come back without going to seeding. Now, on the West Moreno, where that disturbance happened, see, apparently, this kind of disturbance really tills that seed bed in. And I've known that over on the West Moreno, it was called the Flying Horse Ranch, they seeded there too, and that contributed to a quick rebound. So it's just case by case.
You don't want to wait 10 years just for it to come naturally. Like, put out some seed, huh?
It's a great idea. All for it.
I mean, it's going to put it would be a low fire, kind of if the fire came through.
Well, you have your place just got thinned, so maybe you guys that'll created some openings, right?
Lots.
Yeah, so maybe you'll have a chance to maybe give that a try and watch it. Some native plants must have gotten uncovered too, right? When that happened, did you see little tufts of plants that were hiding up next to the trunks of trees?
Not too much.
No.
I
bet if I was a grazier.
Solid juniper, pinon, and a few like mountain mahogany, and that's about it.
Yeah. Well, you'll be more of an expert soon.
Experimental.
It's all, This restoration idea is a whole new idea. You know, the whole approach to everything outdoors used to be extraction. How can we get more from it? And we need to get something from it to pay for the work. So, go ahead and get through it.
Yeah, we're getting after 7:30.
Oh, okay, so sorry. So this is a pile burn happening inside the forest. It's a wet day in Taos Canyon. This is a post-treatment also in Taos Canyon. See all those zillions of stumps? There's still zillions of trees, huh?
Yeah.
See the cross-slope logs? That's erosion stabilization. Do that on purpose. People say, oh, they shouldn't move into the forest. I think they should. These are the folks that brought the thinning job that you see very clearly to the right of the house to that neighborhood. They were all about it. So there's that side of it. This is a shaded fuel break, also in Taos Canyon. There's 3 of them up there now. Connects to the forest on each side of the canyon. You can see the big space between the trees. Button. That's not so evident what I meant to impart there, but I pointed it out earlier. Here's a case where a catastrophic fire was stopped by the fuel treatment area in the middle. The fire was coming downslope. That doesn't happen all that often, but it does. Headed toward Alpine. And there were firefighters in there to stop firebrands from burning the village, and so they did that. I think they only lost 1 shed in that whole village. If they didn't have that treatment area where there was all the space between the trees, they very likely would have lost that village because that contiguous forest up there burned completely.
What year was that one?
Wallow fire?
Wallow.
About 6 years ago, 7, something like that, yeah.
Arizona.
Yes,
That was the Arizona.
exactly. House in the woods, safer than it was before.
There was a tail.
So that's, I think that's the conclusion of one closing there. But the one key point we talked about sublimation. When you have good spacing between your trees, there's more water. Let's see, what did I do?
That was the last one.
Was that the last one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, that's it. Yeah, so that's a big part of what drives it. And the Rio Grande Water Fund out of Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and it's driven by the Nature Conservancy, has been doing a lot of work in Taos. They sponsored the job in El Salto, but they're an advocacy group for thinning the acres in the Rio Grande Watershed up to 30,000 acres per year, so that we can catch up because we're so far behind. And Albuquerque, Bernalillo County Water Authority just committed $5 million over the next 5 years to thinning in the north. So this is a beginning of an investment by the beneficiaries of an ecosystem service to go ahead and invest in that. Thanks for the great technology.
Well, thanks for the great talk.
Thank you.